So Patty Fleming, and then Heather O'Hara. And she may join late. She did notify me of that. David Smith.
Here.
Bo Brunsma.
Here.
Bill Collins.
Here.
Quentin Queer.
Here.
Jim Wanacott.
Here.
And ex officio members, Clayton Christian or designee.
Hey, Wes, this is Brock Tessman here.
Thank you, sir. And Director Scott Osterman or designee.
Scott here.
Thank you all. We have a quorum.
Perfect. Thanks, Wes. Is there anybody that was not part of the roll call that would like to introduce themselves that are on the call?
Chair, this is Dean Bentley. I apologize for being a couple minutes late here.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah, Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Superintendent Elsie Aronson.
Thanks, Superintendent.
Hi, Patrick Nelson from DOI.
Morning, Pat.
Good morning. This is Jackie Treestorm from Ochi.
Jackie.
This is Greg Tillman from District 4 HRDC, Havre, Montana.
Thanks, Greg.
Lisa Newman, Program Manager at Career Training Institute.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Good morning, Jason Butcher with Reach Higher, Montana.
Great. Jason?
Morning, I'm Tim Foster with Grant Associates.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
I'm Deb Krantz. I'm a Regional Director with the Job Service.
Perfect. Thanks, Deb. Okay, that's everybody. There will be time for public comment during the meeting. We will notice that. It's a fairly tight agenda this morning where we don't have a break built in. So if you do need a break, please feel free to take that break. But in interest of your time, we're going to plow through and we should be done by about 1 o'clock. As the first order of business, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Al.
Second, this is Mary Armstrong.
Thanks, Mary. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please signify by saying aye to approve the motion.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. We'll move into really the first order of business, and that is approving the last meeting minutes. They've all been sent to you via link. Wes sent that out through a link on a website. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at that. With that, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes or modify the minutes per your motion.
Chair, this is Dean Bentley. I'd make motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Thanks, Dean. Do we have a second?
McGinley will second.
Thanks, Mike. Been moved and seconded to approve the meetings from the last, the minutes from the last meeting in Bozeman. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. The motion passes. With that, our first topic, post-meeting minutes approval is the Wioa Title I training, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Roy Valdez.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, SWIB members. Appreciate this opportunity. I'll take my video off if I can, if you don't mind. And so I don't contribute to any potential issues, but maybe I can't. That's okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wes. Good morning. Roy Valdez, Workforce Programs Director here at the Montana Department of Labor and Industry. Appreciate the opportunity to share some information today and hopefully assist you in some way in terms of just talking about our programs and our role as these governor's designated administrative entity in not only administering these programs, but obviously supporting our statewide workforce development system and efforts. I tried to make, or I tried not to make this presentation too much in the weeds, if you will, but if any of you have questions or need clarification, please let me go. Please let me know. I'm gonna turn off my video, Wes, if that's okay, and we'll go from there. Just so you don't think I'm pulling your leg today or in this position based on my good looks, here's a little background on myself. I've been with this agency since July of 2019. Prior to that, I worked at the Idaho Department of Labor, my second favorite workforce agency. I was there for about 25 years in several executive level management positions, oversaw most divisions except unemployment insurance. We also supported the Idaho State Workforce Investment Board, which has a very similar structure as Montana. And just for fun, I worked at the US Department of Labor for a couple of years back in the late 90s. Certainly throughout that time, seen many changes, but I believe the focus with these programs are still the same, and that's simply stated, understanding and meeting our employer workforce needs statewide, and also helping to improve our workers' skills through a variety of means, which some will talk about this morning. Next slide there, Wes, if you don't mind. So Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, implemented or enacted in 2014. Overall, it was designed to help job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services to succeed in the labor market, and as equally as important, match employers with those skilled workers they need to compete in the economy. WIOA, if you will, we're a bunch of acronym-laden people here at the Department of Labor, so I hope I'll make sure that I don't go into acronyms too much. But anyway, this act succeeded as some of you may know, the Workforce Investment Act of 1998. Probably need to mute. There's a lot of chatter there, Wes. I don't know if you can mute folks, but anyway, just touch upon a few goals of WIOA, which include improving the coordination between agencies.
He's the one that said he'd meet us in Wioa.
It's kind of disrupting there. Sorry.
I found it and I muted him.
Thanks, Wes. Where was I? Just some of the goals around improving coordination between agencies, ensuring somewhat of what they call seamless workforce system. Also reporting of performance information from training providers and/or vendors for better consumer choice. Also have business inform and guide the workforce system, obviously through workforce boards, with most of the membership being business representatives, as many of you are. And also the use of work-based learning approaches like apprenticeships, so that we can make sure there's sufficient pipelines for our employers. Wes, I can't see the presentation. Which slide are you on?
The vision, Roy.
Okay, so let me just say one note on, although there is a common vision for WIOA, I think it's important to recognize that how we achieve that is different in every state, from their organizational and service delivery structure to which programs they administer. A couple of examples, for instance, Texas has a network, and it's part of that network includes the Texas Workforce Commission, and they administer unemployment insurance, folk rehab, other programs. And they also have 28 local workforce investment boards. which oversee the local workforce system and also contract out service providers. Utah, on the other hand, they became the first state in the nation to consolidate employment and public assistance programs by creating the Utah Department of Workforce Services in 1997. They have over 2,200 workforce services employees, and they cover pretty much all the realm of programs from SNAP, TANF, childcare, voc rehab, housing, technology, veterans, of course, the WIA programs there, unemployment insurance, and workers' comp. Next slide, Wes. I think the purpose of WIA is pretty straightforward. It's about investing in our workers, our job seekers, and employers, whether it's individualized training to meet employer workforce needs or customized training programs to help larger industry sectors, or supportive services such as transportation or assistance with childcare costs for our job seekers, auto repair, housing, tools, uniforms, which will enable those folks enrolled in training programs to complete their training. Just an interesting note that I came across that stated, according to a Institute for Women's Policy Research report, most of the participants who received between 1 and 3 supportive services actually completed their training. So can't minimize that part of our work. Let's go to slide 4, Wes. So WIA is organized by 4 main titles. Title I programs, which include the adult, the youth, and dislocated worker. Title II is our adult education program. Katie Madsen is on. Title III is what is called the Wagner-Pizer and employment services. And Title IV is vocational rehabilitation, also known as the WIA core programs. Just as a note on partnerships, as an FYI here in Montana, our agency, Adult Education and Voc Rehab, have had a memorandum of understanding for some time that highlights our respective programs' eligibility, our efforts to sustain service delivery through communication and cross-agency referrals, and some alignment where we can, and identifying sources of wraparound services. And in fact, we're in the process of updating that, working with Katie and Shanda and Rhonda here at the department to update that memorandum MOU and continue those efforts forward. You may have heard of ARPA. I know that's not related to WIA, but just a note to tell you that we've been engaged with our friends at BPHSS on administrating that program. They also received some resources from ARPA, and in terms of collaborating ideas and best practices to ensure effectiveness and results. You can go to the next slide also, Wes. Also want to make sure that we understand that in terms of how these programs are delivered, our WIA programs, as an example, can be contracted out to nonprofit or private organizations, as we currently do with our youth program, and also adult. I know those folks are on, Lisa from CTI. I'm not sure if our Butte organization is on there, but as far as services under unemployment insurance and employment services, those do have what is called merit staff or state classified requirements applicable to those programs. Under the previous administration, there was a rule drafted and approved to allow states to be flexible with their Wagner-Pizer merit staffing requirement and use non-state staff for employment services. However, there has been a recent current rule that actually is reversing that position. Go to the next slide, Wes. For the most part, our WIA programs are not income-based to be eligible for services. However, training services should be provided to those who don't meet self-sufficiency levels. Therefore, the U.S. Department of Labor does require us to prioritize services to veterans, to spouses of veterans, to low-income individuals, folks that have some skills deficiencies, and those that need the services the most. Also, it's important to note that WIA programs should be utilized after other resources have been exhausted. As one minor example, if a participant is eligible for a Pell Grant, that pays first, and then our WIA programs would pay. WIA also requires us to serve in the youth program, mainly what are termed out-of-school youth. 75% of our expenditures should be targeted to those folks. Those are youth that not younger than 16 or older than 24, and not attending school, dropouts, young folks that are subject to the juvenile or adult justice system, homeless, and a list of other criteria. Let's go to slide 7, Wes. Here's a visual that demonstrates the guidance and implementation process for these WIOA programs, starting from the statute or law to the policies that here at the Montana Department of Labor and Industry are responsible for in the administration of these programs. You know, it's also the process around statewide policies for the coordinated service delivery. Yeah. Next slide, Wes. I know Michelle will present on some of the fiscal more related topics here after me, but just wanted to mention, I know that at the last SWIB meeting, there was some discussion on allocations or the process for distributing these funds from the U.S. Department of Labor to the state to then our service providers. Normally about towards the end of March, early April, the Department of Labor does send out state program allocations for the upcoming program year that starts July 1st. Just a note about that process, the youth funding, all of the youth funding actually is available on April 1st. And the adult and dislocated worker, they break it up, available in 2 allotments. One in July, which depending on the program is about less than 20% of the total. And then the rest of the allotment or balance is distributed in October. The other important item to keep in mind is that the law requires for providing these funds to local workforce areas. In Montana, we have 2. Local Area 1, which consists of the Montana Association of Counties, MACO districts 8, 12, and Mayor County. And Local Area 2, which consists of the remainder of the state of Montana, or the balance of state, if you will. Any questions so far? Anybody? Wes? Or anything? Am I aligned with my presentation?
You are. We're talking about the overview of the allotment process.
Okay. Right.
And then if you want me to go to the next slide.
Yeah, please go to slide 9. Again, not to really get into the weeds, but as Wes and I discussed this, we thought you might be interested in looking at what the Department of Labor's allocation process is. They basically send us these formulas to use when we allocate the adult and youth funding. There is one that talks about an equal split formula, and there's the other one that is a little more complicated. It's more of a discretionary. Discretionary.
All right, how about you?
Okay, hello. Sorry. Discretionary allocation ratio split. Here in Montana, we use the equally split formula, which uses the following factors for funding. The 1/3 of what they term a substantial unemployment, area of unemployment. And that's based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics data from the previous July. For instance, in this case, July of 2020 to June of 21. And they compare each state's unemployment, area of substantial unemployment to all states. Then they use 1/3 excess unemployed in these areas of substantial unemployment, and also 1/3 of disadvantaged adults and youth, which is based more on census data. For instance, for the youth, they use what's called the American Community Survey. Now, I don't get into the details of these, just kind of presenting you what our fiscal folks use when allocating these funds. Slide 10, Wes. This is for the dislocated worker. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, the same formula for all states. And they have about 6 factors. What they call the insured unemployment insurance data. That's the share of folks making a UI claim, and that's weighted at 60%. What they call UI concentrations, plant closings, declining industry, farmer rancher hardship, and long-term unemployment insurance. So it's all these percentages that are used, and obviously some of our rural areas that have higher unemployment insurance, for the most part, are allocated a good amount of resources. Let's go to slide 11, Wes. So these are the program amounts, dollar amounts that we received for this most recent year that started about 6 days ago on July 1st through, and they go through June 30th of next year. Just so you know, based on these factors for the dislocated worker grant, received $150,000 less this year than last year's amount. In addition to these allocations, we also figure what is called carry forward, which is any unspent resources from programs from last year allocation, and those resources are then redistributed at some point later in the program year, which I think for some of you that attended the last meeting, not to get into that, but it served as a basis for our request to, have some flexibility on what we call our allocation policy. But also just wanted to note that couple of things. As part of the dislocated worker grant, states can reserve up to 25% of that grant to provide what are called rapid response services. And the obvious one is when we need to respond to significant layoff events. There's also requirements that we can use those resources to actually help businesses avert layoffs, what they call layoff aversion. And so those are, and for this year, based on last year's expenditures, we were able to make a slight adjustment. Instead of reserving 25%, we reserved 15%, which actually was the similar amount to what was actually expended last year for rapid response. And we were able to make up for the $150,000 deficit in the dislocated worker grant. So that was one of the minor adjustments that we were able to do to not affect services. Slide 12.
Mr. Valdez.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, back up that last slide. Can you explain a little bit too on that, I guess you call it the governor's set aside?
Yes.
Are we doing the full 15% and are we, what are some of the uses for that money we're doing currently?
And actually, Mr. McGinley, this is Wes Feist. Michelle Marsh is going to be presenting on the financial aspect. She's going to get much more into this. And so she'll actually answer that question during her presentation, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Not to put Roy on the spot.
Thank you. I have the same question.
That's a good question.
Thanks.
So slide 12, Wes. Oh, I think this is last slide. So just wanted to mention the what is called the eligible training provider list, which is a DOL requirement that for us to use WIA resources, to pay for training and vendors, those providers must be vetted. Our process to make that list is vendors, providers of training must agree to provide us with information on, the description of their training program, locations, the type of certificates or degrees or, training that they offer, program descriptions and things like that. We also have reciprocity agreements with surrounding states where we can also use their approved vendors. And we have those agreements with with North and South Dakota, Idaho, Alaska, Arizona, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. I believe we have about 484 providers on that list. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, SWIB members, Wes, I know there's lots of stuff covered. As I said, try not to get too much into the weeds. Please let us know as you continue to discuss, workforce development in our state. If you or your WIA committee or subcommittee have in the future or, questions or need more information or pick my brain on my thoughts on workforce development, I need to say that it's not black and white. Successful workforce development systems should be nimble and, able to pivot. Just this week, I shared an article with some of our leadership here on this topic where our current Department of Labor, Secretary of Labor, admitted to a House Appropriations group that some of our workforce development programs haven't been as successful as they need to be. As an example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation came up with a report stating that 74% of hiring managers in 2020 said that there was still a skills gap in the current labor market. And 48% said that candidates still lack the skills needed, to fill those open jobs. I think it's important that we figure out and be more responsive to industry. Obviously, I think we would all agree that jobs today are changing faster than ever before, whether those jobs are remote, they're online or virtual. I think the jobs in the future that we probably haven't thought of yet. So, and I think one of the downsides, and I'm not trying to be critical, but it has been stated that we have a system that at times continues to do the things that we've always done. So bottom line is that we have some challenges. Obviously, we have great opportunities. These programs are critical. We have seen many success stories, which I don't have in front of me, but I know Rhonda and Deb's folks and Career Futures and all of our service providers can provide and have provided in the past. And yet there are some challenges before us. So thank you for being part of the solution. I think that's it, Wes. Thank you again, and certainly open for questions and today or in the future. Appreciate your attention this morning.
Thank you, Roy. Are there any questions for Mr. Valdez?
And I'll just add, Chair Huffab, that we had this presentation and we will do the other titles as well as we go along, but was really so that you can all see what we do. And as Roy mentioned, if you think that there are opportunities to be creative or that we can utilize funding in a different way within the guidance of the law, that we want to hear about that. And knowing about the program a little bit more in depth will help your understanding of how that may happen.
Perfect, thanks. And I think, Roy, one of the things the presentation was great. Being on the Wioa committee, I think this is just my personal view. I tended to get bogged down in policies. And I think your presentation to go through kind of the vision and mission and kind of how the programs actually work and touch people was really important to connect those dots for me. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Wes. Before I leave, I think that's a very important point. Chair, we have been working hard on, reviewing our policies and trying to, if you will, make it more clear, not get bogged down, as you stated, on what we can't do, what we're limited on doing, and what was restricted. I mean, obviously, from a fiscal perspective, those are important things to have. But in our program administration, I think it's also important to ensure that we help guide and somehow translate, if you will, all the regulatory stuff and really make it work for Montana. As I said earlier in my presentation, each state is different. So, obviously as we administer and we, the bottom line is success, is outcomes. And, we have performance, and Raquel will talk to you all about that. But at the end of the day, it's about making this system work. Just be sure that we are on top of that, and we will continue to work on that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So, Chair, this is Superintendent Arntzen. If I could ask a question of Roy?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Roy, great presentation. Appreciate the PowerPoint. When it comes to page 6, and I know we have adult services and we have displaced worker services, and then we have youth services, there was a statement that says we've got out of school at 75% and we have in school at 25%. What is the history of that percentage?
That's a great question, Chair, Superintendent. As I recollect, and there's some folks prior to, so that was enacted within WIOA. Previous to that, states were not held to that percentage. I suspect, I'll give you my perspective, is that the Department of Labor, in its ultimate wisdom, wanted to really hone in on helping those disconnected youth, those youngsters that were much more maybe detached or having barriers, significant barriers, and things like that. I think that's maybe my simplest answer in terms of the history. I didn't read all the committee type discussions, but that would be in attending some of these national conferences whenever they had a legislative staffer come in and talk. They always talked about disconnected and out of school youth, and I think that in part was the focus on that percentage. Now, let me state also that there is a mechanism to request a waiver that we can submit to the feds to modify or change those percentages to where it could be more of a, 50-50. And in fact, there are several, interestingly enough, I think 5 of the states within our region. So we're part of Department of Labor's Region 5, covers Texas and, Dakotas, Wyoming. 5 states have approved waivers to change that percentage. And that is something that has come up recently. Out of school, disconnected youth, this is Roy Valdez talking, are a tough group. Many of our providers would tell us that it's hard to keep their attention. Sometimes it's hard to really, sometimes they lose them. They try to enroll them and then they disappear. So anyway, maybe I'm now babbling too much, but those are a couple of things that may be helpful answering your question.
Thank you.
And if I may also add to that, Superintendent Arnson, we will be exploring a possible waiver for that. So we may ask for some of your feedback because it, as again, has been mentioned a number of times that there's interest in that. So that was a point I was going to make later on today, but we will be exploring a potential waiver for the youth program to see if we could utilize those funds a little bit more creatively and also have more flexibility. And so I would love your input when that comes time, and we will be meeting hopefully later this month, and whomever else would like to join, we would love to have you as part of the conversation.
Great. Are we, any other questions for Roy, or are we ready to move on to Michelle Marsh's financial overview? And Wes, I thought that was a great segue. Michelle, welcome to the SWIB board. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Michelle Marsh, and I'm the Fiscal Officer for Workforce Services Division with Montana Department of Labor and Industry. And Roy provided funding information at a high level, and I'm going to provide a breakdown of the funding and what it means for overall for Montana. Please feel free to stop me if you have any questions or if I can provide additional clarification. I'm also going to stop sharing my screen as well. All right, the first slide is an overall breakdown of the WIOA funds of the state of Montana that we received as of July 1st. In total, we received $6,042,086, which is a decrease from last year. As you can see from this chart, Montana received approximately $17,000 more of adult funds and about $25,000 more in youth. Dislocated worker received a decrease for about $156,000. Under WIOA, states are required to set aside what is referred to as the governor's discretionary or governor reserve funds. Each year, USDOL sets aside a percentage of WIOA funds to be set aside up to 15%. For this year, the set aside amount is the full 15. These funds are used to pay for statewide administration of the WIOA programs, which includes costs for the board, program management, monitoring, technical assistance costs, and other potential workforce initiatives. This amount upcoming for the program, this program year, is about $906,000. The next line is rapid response, and it is part of the Dislocated Worker Program, and it is funded at 15% this year. This program is operated by the Job Service Operations Bureau and includes assistance for businesses and their employees when the business is closing. This funding can be up to 25% of the dislocated worker funds. But this year, Montana has chosen to only utilize $15,000 instead of the full 25% like the years past. This year, the total amount that rapid response will receive is $239,534. The next line captures the administrative costs. Prior to allocation to the service providers, the states are allowed to keep up to 10% of the total funds left after the governor discretionary set aside. These local administrative costs include fiscal and financial reporting activities, as well as other various administrative costs and program costs to run the WIOA program. This year, WC is only keeping about 3% for those local administrative costs, which is about $148,000.
Just the details on that, if you don't mind. Would you talk about the governor's set aside covers board expenses and most of the of your expenses? Then the 3% for this program administrative is at the local level is above and beyond what's in the governor's money.
That is correct. It'll be a combination. So our regular operating cost is combined with the 15% governor set aside along with the local admin of the 3%. And what we don't spend out of the governor's set aside is set aside for governor's discretionary dollars to choose for those program initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Once the local admin funds are accounted for, funds can be allocated to service providers. And that's what the next 3 lines are detailing for us. We are actually allocating $1.7 million to adult service providers, about $1.8 million to youth service providers, and $1 million to the Job Service Operations Bureau for Dislocated Worker Program. The state, Wes, can you please go to the next slide? Does anybody else have any other questions regarding that first slide? As you can see on the bottom, sorry, Wes, if you can go back just one moment. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the increase overall for the programs that were actually contracted with our service providers. So adult, they actually received $27,000 more, youth $25,000, and dislocated worker is approximately $71,000.
I have a question, Michelle, and maybe you'll get to this in your slide later or in your presentation later on. I would like to know, being a newbie and learning all of this, what programs are actually used. So if we've got 1.8 going to youth, 1.7 to adult, what are the programs and where that money is actually going to?
So later in my presentation, I'll actually show you how much is going to each service provider and the name of that service provider.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome. So if we can go ahead and go to the next slide, unless anybody has any other questions regarding this overall snapshot of where the funding is going. Okay, so this slide talks about the state of Montana 2 local areas, and Roy touched base on this. Again, this map shows you those local areas. Local Area 1, which is Mako District 8, 12, and Mark County, and Local Area 2 is the remainder of the state. These local areas were actually originally designated in 1976 under WIOA. Any state that hadn't operated local areas in the past are required to continue to have those local areas. The next slide shows you which county resides in the local areas and the breakdowns of the counties for each Mako district. You can go to the next slide, Wes, please. So earlier this morning, Roy talked about how the WIOA funds are allocated to state, so I won't repeat everything he discussed, but this is a quick overview of how the funds are allocated. The state of Montana utilizes the same allocation method as USDOL to allocate to the local areas. For the adult and youth program, funds are allocated to the state based on the third. Then we allocate to the local areas using the same criteria, but we also apply that hold harmless rule. Then once the allocation is determined by local area, then we distribute funds by Mako district. We use the average percentage of funds received by that Mako district compared to the respective local area in the past 2 years. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. This slide shows you a dislocated worker funding allocation. And as you can see, it looks significantly different than adult and youth. And to allocate to our local areas, we use the same economic factors as USDOL. As you can see, there is a different weight factor for each criteria, and that is actually determined by the board. And we also use the same hold harmless of the 90% for dislocated worker as well. For all these programs, we apply what is called a hold harmless. So local areas don't receive an allocated percentage of funds less than 90% of the average allocated percentage of funds from the previous 2 years. It's important to note that the 90% of funds is not based on the specific amount, but a percentage. While the amount of funds can increase and decrease from year to year based on the economic conditions, the total funds received from USCOL, the hold harmless helps eliminate those large potential swings and decreases. Once the funds are allocated to the local areas, states have more flexibility on how the local areas can allocate funds to the service providers. In Montana, we allocate funds to the service providers based on the MACO districts as decided by this board. This has been used for many years, and about 3 years ago, we revisited with SWIB Wioa committee to look at possible alternatives to ensure our allocation method to service providers was equitable. Over the course of all those meetings, it was determined that the allocation method was equitable and as possible, and decided to continue to use the same method. For the adult and youth programs, they were awarded by MACO districts in Montana, and for the dislocated worker program, it's allocated by statewide. In the next couple of slides, are going to list all our service providers. As you can see, most of the service providers are non-state providers except for JMG, the Jobs for Montana Graduates program. They operate District 10. The dislocated worker program is operated statewide by our Job Service Operations Bureau. And the next slide, please, Wes. For adult, we have state and non-state providers. However, the majority of the program is operated by job services, as you can see. And in certain districts, we do have where they are partnered with the non-state provider. Finally, the next three slides will show you the actual amount allocated to each MACO district. In these slides is the amount allocated to the provider last year, so you can see the difference. I won't go through each one of them, but I will point out that the decrease that you're seeing in MACO District 8 and 12, these are part of Local Area 1. Unfortunately, these districts are seeing a reduction in funds due to the economic factors in those counties. And these counties don't have a high excess of unemployment or economically disadvantaged individuals as other counties across the state. So those funds are pushed to the other areas. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. The next slide shows you the youth allocation compared to last year and what they're getting this year allocation. And everybody will see a small increase from last year. And finally, the last slide is a comparative of the dislocated worker funding across the state. And that includes my presentation. I appreciate your guys' time today. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask away.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. Are there any questions for Michelle? I guess I've got one, Michelle, if I may, and I'm not sure this is really a fair question for you, but when we're talking about numbers, it just kind of pops into my head. If we think about the total allocation, you know, kind of back to one of your earlier slides, I can get to it here quick. Slide 2, you know, so we're talking roughly, you know, $6.1 million of funding. If we think about that bucket of money, I don't want to say is it enough, but how does that money match up to the need that we're seeing across the state in terms of the services required? I mean, are we scratching the surface with 6.1 million? How much might we need to move the ball? How much are we short? And just very, very big pictures. And if we had more money, kind of bolting onto this, if we had more money, and the need was there. Do we have bottlenecks in the providers, or could you just characterize this dollar amount in terms of matching it with need?
Sure, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I guess overall, the past few years, due to COVID especially, we have seen carry forward. So in regards to, do we spend all the money? No, we don't spend all the money out to the, some service providers may and some may not. And that's where the money gets recaptured at the state level and then is distributed the following year as carry forward dollars. So, and that can change from year to year depending upon how much everybody leaves on the table. And we did have a fairly large dollar amount of carry forward this year. And it's hard to compare our current economy with past years. In past years, it would, it wouldn't be normal that youth got a lot of carry forward. And this year we did. Same with adult. We always have a little bit of adult, it seems, for carry forward, but we had a large dollar amount for carry forward, dislocated worker, and rapid response for state fiscal year 22. We won't know what the carry forward numbers are until about late October, November, and that's when the funds get redistributed back out to the service providers.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can add, Wes, this is Roy. I just want one comment just to follow up, if you don't mind. I mean, I think that's an excellent question. Obviously, just from a high level, the allocations take into account the unemployment insurance percentages and things like that, right? So that's kind of one of the significant impacts to where the money goes. If you look at areas and things like that, but I think we also matching where the needs are is an effort that we have undertaken. And please remember that this year, we also received an additional $2 million under ARPA, and that was for a rapid retraining program. I'm just talking about our agency here, but and so that, I mean, for the most part, it's been an interesting dilemma for us. We actually have, as long as I've been here, a good amount of resources. Not a lot of folks signing up, for training and things like that. For a lot of reasons, it's not always easy to put your thumb on that. In fact, yesterday, just talking to our friends at Health and Human Services, some of their, I can't speak for them, but I know they mentioned that their participation or their workloads are significantly decreased in some of their, for instance, the SNAP employment and training program. So that's an excellent point, and I think we will continue to work with you and the SWIB and West to make sure that we are, in fact, hopefully using our resources in a flexible way to really put the dollars where they need it the most. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. And I think that part of when I think about spending, actually spending money that's allocated, the ARP is a great example. I worry there's so much money coming to Montana. Can we possibly find the construction crews to place that capital before the statutory deadlines? And I know that, the unemployment challenge across the state, the service providers that handle this Wioa money, they're not immune to those same challenges within their own agencies. So, as we think about from a SWIB perspective, just how do we trying to move the ball forward from a workforce perspective? We've got these blocks of money, where are the bottlenecks? And, it's all part of that process. So I appreciate both Roy, you and Michelle's explanation of that. Helps very much.
I have a question as well. On that one slide where it shows the local region, local area 1, and it has that group of counties, and then the rest of Montana is local area 2. Did I understand it correctly that that was established in 1976? And my reason for asking this, it kind of links into this. If we're asking the question, how does the funding, the money match the need? Well, if that was established in 1976, a lot has changed since then. Do we need to look at that as well to see, are those funds being allocated according to the need in those other areas, because a lot's changed since 1976.
And Mary, this is Wes Feist. We would love to review that, but unfortunately, once those local areas were designated, the U.S. Department of Labor and the legislation that accompanies that does not allow for a reconsolidation of local areas. So once you have them forever, unless the federal legislation changes. However, that's why we do request a waiver so that we can at least act as a single area state and as a one board. However, the funding must always still go to those local areas. And we'll have more about allocation and reallocation later as we looked into that from the past meeting. And I'll go into that a little bit more later on. But we wish we could review that more thoroughly and have a change to that, but that's not something that's currently allowed by law.
Ah, okay, thank you for clarifying that.
There any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again, Michelle, for your presentation. I'd like to call Raquel Smitham to the floor. Welcome, Raquel, and the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thanks, Paul. So what I'm going to be showing you all today is a high-level review of Wioa performance and how it relates to reporting and to the core programs. So I'm going to share my screen with you all.
Raquel, I'm sorry, I had put it up already. Do you want me to navigate slides or you?
Oh, okay, you do have it up. Yeah, if you can navigate, that works for me. Okay, so what are the Wioa reporting requirements? DOL requires that each grantee submit a participant individual record layout, also known as the Parole report. It contains record level data on the participants served. We're required to submit this report both quarterly and annually for the core programs. I have a table to the right that shows the reporting due dates. So we have 5 reports total due throughout the year. Within the Parole report, we're required to include 2.5 years of reportable individual, participant, and exeter data within that report. Wes, could you move to the next slide? Okay, so the Wioa core programs and partners, I'm sure you've gone over this in the previous slides by Roy, but here's a chart of all of the core programs, who is responsible to administer them and who's responsible for reporting. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm only going to be speaking about the reporting requirements as they relate to DLI. Wes, could you move? Oh, thank you. Who is included in the Parole? So we're required to report on individuals served under Wioa Titles 1 and 3 programs, in addition to other employment and training programs administered by USDOL. So those would be dislocated worker grants, JVSG, and TAA. Those participants end up in the Parole as well. And then within both the quarterly and annual Parole reports, we report on multiple cohorts of individuals. And I have a table here to give a brief description of those cohorts. And we'll start with the reportable individuals. So reportable individuals are individuals who are basically only using self-service. So they get included in our report, but are not included in performance measures. Then we have current participants. And those are participants who started participation before or during the period and either have not exited or have exited. Those are included in our performance measures. And then we have the cohort group called exiters. Those are participants who have an exit date during the previous quarter. And because we're required to report on 2.5 years of data, we still include exiters from the previous quarter in the Parole. Okay, what data is collected in the Parole? The USDOL Parole schema has over 400 data elements. Right now we're reporting out on 489 data elements within each Parole report that we submit. The data that we collect and report on the Parole consists of demographic information, program engagement, service details, outcome data, referral details, training details, and training costs actually is another one that's not listed on here. So there's a lot of information that we're reporting out on the Parole. Some of these data elements are program specific, so they may only apply to participants enrolled in TAA or the adult program. So it's not that we're reporting over 400 data elements for each participant. That's just the total number that is included within the report. And now we're going to talk about our Wioa performance indicators. So this question comes up sometimes, why is performance important? So performance is important because it allows us to assess the effectiveness of our programs. It allows us to make data-informed improvements, be accountable to taxpayers, and support our communities. There are 6 performance indicators, 5 that look at outcomes for job seekers, and 1 that looks at outcomes of services to employers. Performance is assessed technically on every report that we submit. So we do get performance indicator results back for every quarterly report that we submit, but it's only the annual report that can give us a pass or fail on our scorecard. And then program year, what is a program year? A program year begins on July 1st and ends on June 30th. And then our primary indicators of performance, the job seeker indicators, are employment rate 2nd quarter after exit, employment rate 4th quarter after exit, median earnings 2nd quarter after exit, credential attainment rate, measurable skill gains, and then the last one that's looking at business services is effectiveness in serving employers. So we're going to talk a bit about each of the indicators and what's being measured and why are they looking at that. Employment rate 2nd quarter after exit. In this measure, we're looking at the outcomes of adult, dislocated worker, and employment service participants, also known as Wagner-Pizer. Successful outcomes for this measure are participants who exited during the reporting period, who were in unsubsidized employment during the 2nd quarter after exit from the program. For youth participants, we're looking at the same criteria. However, success includes participants who were in training or education in the 2nd quarter after program exit. And why is it being measured? The employment rate 2nd quarter after exit measure captures an individual's initial employment after exit from a program. So the measure racks the ability of program participants to be in unsubsidized employment at any point during the 2nd post-exit quarter. This measure, as well as employment rate 4th quarter after exit, are not intended to provide indication of the level of employment. So we're not looking at if employment was full-time, part-time. We're really just looking to see if they were employed. Employment rate 4th quarter after exit, it's the same as the previous slide, except for we're looking at participants who were employed in the 4th quarter after they exited one of our programs. And then the median earnings, this is looking at the cohort of individuals who are included in the employment rate 2nd quarter after exit. What we're doing here is just looking for the median earnings that we got back from wage matches for those participants. So we're just listing all the reported wages for that cohort of people and then choosing the median. For credential attainment, we're looking at individuals who've earned credentials that were enrolled in one of our programs, and were also enrolled in education or training. So this one works a little bit differently as far as how it works. We're actually looking at the outcomes. We're looking at participants, that cohort of exiters that are included in the Parole. Success would be a reported credential for an individual who was enrolled in a core program and was also in education or training. We can also accept credentials for these individuals up to 1 year after they exit the program. And then why is it being measured? DOL is interested in this measure and interested in us reporting on this measure because it attests to an individual's skills and competencies. They play an important role in developing a skilled workforce, and it has been shown that credentials may contribute to improved employment retention and an increase in earnings. So we have some additional credential information here. I've listed the types of acceptable credentials. There is no master list of every type of credential that can be accepted, as long as the credential fits into the framework of one of these categories, and we can record it in our system. Credential attainment rate specifications for Wioa youth are a little bit different. So for Wioa youth, we're looking at all in-school youth for this measure, and then for out-of-school youth, we're only looking at those individuals who were included in a certain type of training. And measurable skill gains. Here we're looking for the progress of program participants in training or education. So there's 5 different types of measurable skill gains categories that we can record an MSG under, as they're also often referred to. Why are we looking at this? USDOL is interested in seeing not only which of our participants are earning a credential, but also what types of gains are they earning on their way to get the credential. So Wes, if you want to move to the next slide, I have the different categories of credentials listed here. So we have educational functioning level, secondary school diploma, a secondary or post-secondary transcript or report card, training milestone, and skills progression. I won't go into too much detail about each of these individually, but a good example of an MSG would be for a participant who is enrolled in post-secondary education. Once they complete that training, at the end, hopefully they'll earn a credential, but on the way, for each report card that we receive from that individual, we can record each report card's passing scores as a measurable skill gain. And then there are specifications for Wioa youth. Again, it's the same. It's really looking at the type of youth, and all in-school youth are included, but not all out-of-school youth are included unless they're enrolled in one of those types of training or education. So the last one that we have here is the one that's looking more at business services. So this is effectiveness in serving employers. This one we don't have too much information on. I think that shortly after Wioa came out, this was put out to be a measure that they were testing, that they were interested in implementing. Technically, it's still kind of in the test phase. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at performance under Wioa that looks at the outcomes of services to employers. So we're required, when this was initially put out, we were required to report on 2 out of the 3 measures that were proposed for effectiveness in serving employers. In Montana, we actually chose to report on all 3 of these measures. So within our annual report, we're also reporting retention with the same employer, repeat business customers, and employer penetration rate. And then we have our performance level negotiations. So for the 5 performance measures that are geared towards job seekers, we actually have a set level of performance that we need to meet. Those levels of performance are set via negotiations with DOL. So we negotiate every 2 years. In negotiating the levels of performance, we're required to apply the following 3 factors. The first one is comparison with negotiated level of performance established for other states, meaning that they don't want to set the bar really high for one state and then allow another state to have really low levels of negotiated performance. The second thing that they're looking at are the adjustments using DOL's statistical adjustment model. So DOL has its statistical adjustment model that they use to look at economic factors that could impact our performance in the future. It also includes historical performance information. And the point of it is to help inform these discussions, to allow us to look at historically what we've done to help us predict what we may do in the future, while also taking into consideration economic factors within our state. The third one that we have is promotion of continuous improvement and performance accountability measures. So there's interest in typically increasing our performance level every couple of years instead of remaining at a consistent level of performance. It's expected that, you know, we improve performance. The fourth thing is assistance in meeting long-term performance, government performance, and Results Act goals. So again, it's just another way to help us meet those goals. It can include technical assistance, et cetera. So if we're not meeting our performance goals, what can they do to help us? And if we haven't been meeting those performance goals, what are we doing to meet them in the future? So here we actually have already negotiated our levels of performance for program year 22 and 23. Here's what we have for the DOL administered core programs. We have Wioa Title I adult, dislocated worker, youth, and then we have Title III Wagner-Pizer employment services. So you'll see the 5 measures for 3 out of 4 of these programs. For Wagner-Pizer, since we are not enrolling those individuals into training, they exclude the credential attainment rate and measurable skill gains, since those are geared more towards participants in training. And then assessing a state's performance. So I mentioned before that it's really our annual report that they use to determine whether or not we are passing or failing in our performance measures. How they do this is they look at a few different factors to determine our success for these performance measures. So what they do at the end of the program year, so they take that statistical adjustment model and they look at the characteristics of participants that were served during that program year that they're assessing and the economic factors within our state. Then they assign an adjustment level that gets added on to our negotiated level. So we have our negotiated level, and then they use that model to make an adjustment that they think is more realistic to show how our performance should have been. And then our state's failure to report or failure to meet adjusted levels of performance can lead to sanctions. Once adjusted negotiated levels of performance have been calculated, performance is determined using 3 criteria. So the first one is the overall program score. That's the average of all individual indicators within a program. The overall state indicator score, the average of a particular individual indicator score across programs. And then the third one is the individual indicator score. The scores are calculated by dividing the actual level of performance by the adjusted level of performance. And we'll walk through that individual indicator score and the overall state indicator score in the next few slides. But Wes, it looks like there's a request to go back to our negotiated levels for 22 and 23. And just a reminder that what we're looking at here are program years, which are on a different, a little bit different than the fiscal year. So for program year 23, you'll see our negotiated levels in the right-hand column.
Veronica, does that answer your question? Okay, we'll take that as a yes. Thanks, Raquel.
So Raquel, this is Paul. If I could just ask one question on that slide.
Okay.
When you look at the program years 22, 23, the negotiated levels, should I be thinking about those as that's the goal? You're trying to hit 71%, for example, employment rate second quarter? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, you got it. So these are the goals that we determined we thought we could meet when we met with DOL to assess previous performance and those economic factors within our state.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Wes, go ahead and go forward one more, please. Okay, so there's a big disclaimer about our performance assessment for program year 20. I'm not going to read through each of these bullets, but what DOL did for this past program year is they took into account the impacts of COVID. We know that during COVID, a lot of training providers were shut down. There was a lot going on that was affecting our ability to provide service to these individuals. So in consideration of that, they are only assessing us on employment rate second quarter after exit and the median earnings second quarter after exit. That's not to say that they're not interested in the results for the other measures or that we haven't had conversations about our results. It's just that they can't necessarily assign a pass or fail score when there was so much out of our control during that time frame. So I have some key terms and definitions here. You'll see these throughout the following slides. So the first one is the negotiated level. We've talked about that. That's the level that we negotiate on that's assigned prior to the start of the program year. Then we have the adjusted level, which is our negotiated level with that added adjustment factor on that. The amount of the adjustment factor comes from that statistical adjustment model. And then we have the actual level of performance, and that's looking at our actual level divided by the adjusted level. So the figure below shows the individual indicator scores for each program. The scores are calculated by dividing the actual level of performance by the adjusted level of performance. So a failure occurs if one of these individual indicator scores is below 50%. So although this table is showing our individual indicator scores specifically, we did pass as a state since all of these are green. We met more than 50% for each program within each indicator. So as a state, our overall score was passing. And then we're gonna, in the following slides, go through each of these individually. The first one that we're looking at here is for Wioa adult. Again, we're only looking at 2 of the performance indicators because of COVID. So the first one is the employment rate, second quarter after exit. We were passing here. I don't know if it's necessary to walk through each of these calculations, but I did add them in if we send this out afterwards to help explain. So here you can see our negotiated level for employment rate second quarter after exit in the adult program was set at 71% prior to program year 20. At the end of the program year, DOL used that statistical adjustment model to calculate an adjustment factor. They determined through using that model that it's expected that our performance actually could have been closer to 76.4% instead of the 71% that we negotiated on. And then our actual level of performance was 74.8%. So then our indicator score here is just the difference between dividing that actual level by the adjusted level. And then you can see here to the right for median earnings second quarter after exit, the adjustment factor from the model is not always positive. Sometimes we have a negative adjustment factor, just saying that we took into consideration things that were going on in Montana at the time. And we think that when we negotiated, we set the bar a little bit too high for that program year. Wes, do you want to go to the next slide? So for the following slides, I'll just go through what the indicator score was, since that's what's being used to assess if we passed for these individual indicators. We had 111.5% passing score for dislocated worker and employment rate second quarter after exit. And for median earnings second quarter after exit, we had a passing score of 143%. For Wioa youth, employment rate second quarter after exit, our passing indicator score was 94.1%. For median earnings second quarter after exit, it was 128.6%. And then for the last one that we're going to look at here is for the Wagner-Pizer program. Our passing score for employment rate second quarter after exit was 80.5%. Median earnings was a passing score of 94.8%. And that wraps up the overview on performance and our performance assessment for program year 20. We're closing out on program year 21 here at the end of June. So once we have that annual report submitted by October 1st, DOL will take those results, and then sometime early in 2023, we'll get the results of our performance assessment for this most recent program year. Here I have some resources that you can use. We've got the two TEAGLs that are often used to look at the calculations for performance and to get definitions, get more specifics on performance, and then a couple of other DOL guides that are helpful in learning about the Parole and the different performance indicators. So I think now we can open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Raquel. Are there questions for her on this presentation?
And I did announce to the group that anyone can review the materials should they wish to. And I sent the links, as well as if you'd like to be added to the interested parties list, which many of you are. You can also do that if you'd like to receive updated information.
So I've got one question, Raquel, if I may. This is really timely. I don't know how many months ago, Wes, you and I were talking about kind of this scorecard. If there is some way to create a scorecard to measure progress, and he said, well, there's these performance indicators, we're going to get into it. So this hits that mark perfectly. Where could we find, or is it possible to get sort of the results of these performance indicators on a quarterly basis? Is that possible? Just to see, just for a board, from a, how progress is occurring and measured across the state.
Yep, we do get those results quarterly, and I can share those. So we'll roundtable with Wes and figure out the best way to deliver those reports to you all. But yes, we do have them for each quarter that can be shared. And then with that annual assessment that we just looked at, we can share that with you all as well.
Perfect, thank you. There any other questions for Raquel? Well, thank you again for your presentation, Raquel. And at this time, we've covered a lot of areas regarding Wioa, and I would open it up to public comment should we have any. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next order of business. I'd like to welcome Jane Demare to the floor. And Jane, could you please walk us through the credential policy review?
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. The credentials policy is piggybacks.
Jane, I'm sorry, Jane, to interrupt. We did have a question come in. Raquel, are you still on
sure.
the call?
Yep, I'm still here. So it looks like there's a question from Veronica. How are the negotiated percent determined when results are not current? Veronica, would you mind speaking a little bit more about that? I think that I understand what you're asking, but I just want to be sure.
Yes, I just wondered, you've already negotiated the fiscal year 23 percentages, which didn't change from 22. And it looked like from the 2020 numbers that we did exceedingly well. So how are those percentages negotiated? Because in some areas, in previous years, they always expect to do better and better. And since we exceeded what they required, I'm surprised that they haven't made you negotiate at a higher level for those things. So I just wondered, how do you come up with the fiscal year 23 percentages when you're looking at 2020 year's results?
So we do the best that we can. We use that model that DOL provides to help us make an informed decision. We did raise our rates for almost every measure, but they don't jump too high from program year to program year. What we really look at least in Montana, to help have that conversation about negotiated levels so that we're not setting the bar too high to something that's unattainable, is we use a lot of our historical performance results. And what I did for this, those negotiations for 22 and 23 was really averaged out our annual performance over the last 3 or 4 years, so that we could say, really have a full picture look at what our performance has been, because some of those performance results could be outliers in the data set. So just because we did exceedingly well in program year 23, if that's not our normal, we just want to take into consideration our historical data. So even though we did very well there, our average was closer to those levels that you saw presented for program year 22 and 23.
Thank you.
Answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Raquel before I present the credentials policy? So I appreciated the opportunity to present this morning and also to piggyback on some of the points Raquel made. Wes, were you going to pull up the policy or the change summary?
You bet. Let me get that pulled up. Just 1 second here.
Thank you. So we can stop here at the background. The background in the previous version focused on the credential attainment calculation. And when I looked at this, I thought that is more or less, in my mind, a mathematical calculation that's more internal. And I was interested in focusing the background on the actual humanity of our job seekers, our businesses, and their local communities, and the opportunities that credentials present for economic growth and stability. And so we worked hard to have it reflect what is actually going on in people's lives and how to support them to be successful. Now, in the scope, we added, as Raquel mentioned, TAA and the GVSG program, which is Jobs for Veterans Service Grant, because those were now included in the data validation policy. And the data validation policy is important to the credentials because it's an important piece of reporting. It protects the integrity of whatever documentation we're using to prove that our participants are earning credentials. So Wes, if you could go to page 2, please. Right, down to part C, the characteristics of credentials. This is another important piece because it strengthens the value of credentials to our individual participants and businesses. You have industry recognition. The idea is that they are stackable and that it allows a sequence of credentials to be accumulated over time to build up a job seeker's qualifications. So if someone is in a current position but wants to move up a career pathway or up a career ladder, oh, I see, I need to make a change there. Sorry about that on line 63, to a different and potentially higher wage job. And that they're portable. For example, if they're recognized and accepted as supporting qualifications in other settings, other geographical locations, educational institutes, or other industries or businesses. And that they're issued by an accredited body. And so I've listed the different options for accreditation. So we also added technical assistance language, which is important because that will be provided by the program managers and also Raquel. So then there's that collaboration between our performance reporting, our monitoring policy, and also our programs. So at this time, I can take any questions that there would be.
Hey there, this is Chanda Hermanson with Vocational Rehabilitation. This was interesting for me to review given that we're measured on the same thing, and I just really diving in to see where our guidance diverges and where things are uniform. But I did have some questions about, I saw the acronym ETP on lanes like 80, sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. It was in the 80s. I can pull it up here. Under identifying relevant credentials, like 88 through 97. That's this ETP acronym. So I wasn't familiar with that. So I familiarized with that myself with that. And I was just reflecting, might want to identify that that's eligible training provider somewhere in this, because again, doesn't explain what that is.
I can do that.
And then, which made me see how that is managed in other states. And I was just wondering, in Montana, who determines who an eligible training provider is? And is there a list of those?
Roy? So there is a list.
And sorry, I don't know if Roy is still on or not, but the educational training providers, there is a list, Chanda, and it's on the website. This is Wes Feist, by the way. And I can send that link out to folks.
This is Jared Roop, the eligible training provider list program manager. I'm also on the call and can answer any questions regarding that if you'd like, Wes or Paul.
Yeah, I mean, if we could get information on that, that would be great to make sure that so our policies could align as much as possible.
Sure, Chanda. Of course, you know me, and we've worked together for years. There's always been a Wioa ETPL list. We'll send you the URL, and then as far as who determines, utilizing federal guidelines, I'm the one that determines through an application process. For our university system, we have a master data sharing agreement, so we don't make them apply for each and every single solitary program that they offer to be on our listing, and we certainly don't list them all, but if we had a potential participant that was interested in Helena College of Technology's welding program and it wasn't currently on, we could add that one fairly quickly and adroitly. Others, for example, nonprofits and for-profit organizations, they just apply with a simple form and I review it, and provided they don't have any anything untoward in their background, such as a federal or state debarment, and they provide all of the documentation up front, I'll place them on the listing for a year. And then at that time that the year is up, they have to provide us a certain amount of data on Wioa and non-Wioa participants in their programs so that we can submit the ETPL parole at the end of the year. And if they fail in that, then I usually remove them. But
great,
that's just kind of a high level there. But yeah, if anyone has any questions specifically on that, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I think we could definitely work with some of the work you're already doing around that. The other question I had was around the mention of product vendor. I've not heard that term before, and I was just wondering if I could learn more about what that means and how those are identified.
Well, it would be, we had discussions about this too. And so it's pretty broad language, but one example that comes to mind is if there was a certificate of training that was sponsored by Microsoft, for example. And that would be the best example. That I also remember, Raquel, you had a couple of other examples that were more IT related, if you're still on. If not, I'd be happy to send you some of the examples that we had come up with.
That would be great. And it might be, I don't know, more user-friendly to list some examples in here so it makes, so the reader understands that. Since it sounds like something that might be harder to identify.
Okay. Well, we'll have some discussion here. We generally, Shanda, stay pretty high level with those kinds of statements. And the reason why then it allows us to be more nimble. But let me see what I can do.
No problem. Thanks, Jane.
Jane, just one additional question. During your presentation, you talked about line 63 needing to make a change. I didn't follow what change you were needing to make.
There's a typo there. I'm sorry. Let's see. I think it said latted.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
It just caught my eye. Sorry for the confusion.
No, it's a good catch. I blew right by it and I read it as ladder 3 times. So
Well, I know, and this is what happens when there's extensive work on a policy. Is after a while, you see what you want to see.
Yep.
So
that sounds like something I do all the time. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And Mary Heller had asked a question about the list, and I did send that link out to everyone, and that is the ETPL list. So, or the ETPL is the eligible training provider list, and that is the link that was sent out. If there was something different, Mary, just let me know, or Jared can further elaborate on that. We also had a question from Scott Osterman. I don't know if that question got answered or not.
I was looking for this actual document. I must have missed it somewhere. I apologize.
This on the agenda, the credential policy is the attachment number 4.
That's right. Thank you.
Or I'm sorry, attachment number 6.
I'm not seeing Scott's question.
No, he put his hand down.
Okay.
So, Wes, given there's a couple of changes, possibly just that single letter typo change, as well as the potential to create, maybe spell out at least the first ETP in the document to then set the stage as a defined acronym. What is the best path to move forward? Do we potentially approve this subject to those changes? Or is it more appropriate to table it to the next meeting?
With the change to adding some verbiage, I think it can be changed. The motion can be made and approved should the board want to with those changes. But if anything else more substantial was needed, then maybe table. But if it was those 2 things and or even a list to the ETPL as a reference, those 3 things could possibly be added and approved.
Okay. So to that end, I would open it up for the board to potentially make a motion to either approve subject to those changes, deny, or table the credential policy itself.
This is Patty Fleming. I move that we accept with modifications.
Great. Thanks, Patty. And do we have a second?
This is Adam Gilbert, and I second.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. It's been moved and seconded to approve the credential policy subject to those changes stated in the motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks,
so
Jane.
The next item of business is to talk about committee assignments and tasks. Wes and I have spent a fair bit of time on this. It actually was a little more complicated than what we thought. I do appreciate all those that sent in their preferences for committee assignments. And we worked really hard to try to honor all those requests and make sure that we got you in the places that you had the highest level of interest. What we centered on were 4 committees plus an executive committee. So we have a Apprenticeship Advisory Council, a Wioa committee, a Workforce Policy Committee, and an Education, Training, and Upskill Committee. The chairs of those committees will then constitute sort of a broader executive committee with the purpose of really making sure that all the committees stay in alignment as we move forward as a collective SWIB board. So at the end of this meeting, you will be receiving email letters listing your committee designations. The chairs have all been contacted and they've accepted their their chair assignments. What I've asked them is that they set up the first committee meeting for the respective committees by September 1st. That'll allow you to hold that first committee meeting. It'll allow us to get together in an executive committee, discuss the results of those meetings, and then be prepared for our October board meeting, which will be in person. I'm going to let Wes get into that as the final item of the agenda. At that committee meeting, what we're asking is really to sit down and really brainstorm and come up with those top list of items that you want to focus on as a committee that are the most important to you. And then we'll bring that together and visit. I think, you know, we looked at these committees and this seemed like the right number of committees. We might have to adjust that. And there may be some adjustments to membership. There's still some appointees that we're working through. But at this point, it seemed like the right balance between enough detail to have something to work on versus getting so broad in terms of your committee assignment that it's hard to find that specificity that you need to come up with those goals. So with that will be coming out. Again, I appreciate everybody's interest in committees. The discussion at the last board meeting was fantastic. And again, we tried to honor all of your interests in those committee assignments. Are there any questions? And Wes, do you mind maybe, I'm really a newbie on Zoom. I use Teams, but maybe switch, there you go. Thank you. Looking at the presentation, I wasn't sure if anybody was still on, so.
Sorry about that. I was typing away.
You're good. Any comments, questions, concerns about what I just talked about? Great. Well, I look forward to it, and I think this is this really gives us an opportunity to make some tangible progress as a board through these committees. So again, I appreciate your interest and willingness to serve on committees and to lead those committees as the chairs. Also, Heather O'Hare joined. I do want to thank you, Heather, for willing to step up and serve on the Montac slot. That's fantastic. Wes, I'll turn it over to you to talk about state plan modifications.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone. And we are flying through things. We hope that you've gotten some information out of today. And then we hope that you'll get some information out of the next, the committee meetings. And then we'll have more to discuss and hopefully move forward on with goals from the committees in October. Some of the things that I wanted to just update you all on, the state plan modifications are still continuing. It seems as if the process is taking a very long time, but wanted to just let you know, part of it was our updating negotiated levels of performance. We did that back in June and had a good conversation with the U.S. Department of Labor. They were a little more accommodating, I think, this time than in the past, as far as negotiating those performance indicators, pushing us to do better as we should, but also not holding us to a standard that's unattainable. There was one piece that I had stumbled through during our first meeting, which was the reallocation waiver that was kind of inherited to me and had to describe. During the modification process, we had an in-depth conversation with the U.S. Department of Labor, and they identified that they were going to deny that waiver only because it was not necessary. There was thought that it was necessary previously, but in reality, it was not a necessary waiver to request. It's something that we can actually do within the confines of our own policies and procedures. And so what we have done moving forward, we have met and discussed the allocation and reallocation process. We will be bringing something to the board, hopefully by the October meeting, that will be a review and a change to how we reallocate funding. There's not much we can do to allocate funding. That's a set federal guideline. But as far as the reallocation process, to allow us more flexibility and hopefully allow us to pursue more projects and provide more consistent funding to our service providers, that we will be able to have something for you all. So we're in the midst of going through our process to review that policy now. we have been approved for our single area board waiver request. So it was to allow us, the State Workforce Development Board, to carry out the roles and responsibilities of a local board. We don't really have an end date on the letter of that approval from the U.S. Department of Labor, but we must include it in every state plan and state plan modification. So back to Mary Heller's point of, can't we change this in you'd think in to make things simple? Yes, but unfortunately we can't. We have to request that waiver, but it has been approved. There are some other small pieces that we have been working through with our board structure and some verbiage within some of our plans that needed to be updated, and that's in the midst of being updated and hopefully will be done. I have a call with our federal project officer actually this afternoon. I'm hoping to finish up the last few outstanding items for them to hopefully approve the plan. And we will, of course, update you on that as that comes out. I'll send you all the message from the U.S. Department of Labor in that letter once it is approved. Some additional things I have, hopefully you're all receiving the Montana Economy at a Glance. I do have you all signed up to receive that. If you're not, just send me an email or shoot me a message and I'll make sure that you do. That's something provided by the U.S. or the Montana Department of Labor and Industry every month. And it's important for you all to receive that as well. And then the last thing that I wanted to, or a couple things, the youth waiver came up in conversation. And so that is something that we will follow up with you all soon. And there has been a request to review that program. We're doing so because there's been a request, but also waiting until now because we're trying to get the state plan modifications completed before we then start asking for other waivers on things. But that is, will be in the works. And it's also supported by the Department of Labor. We've had a conversation with them and they will be happy to review that policy with us as well. And any waiver we want to request as other states have done so. So if we do, it will probably be modeled after some other states, Indiana and Michigan are two that come to mind. Last piece of follow-up and wrap-up is our next meeting. If we stay on the same schedule, it will be October. Something that I have proposed to Chair Hopov and have discussed here at the Department of Labor and Industry is the week of October 17th. There may be some events happening in Great Falls with the Montana Economic Developers Association, and then a World of Works event through Central Montana Works. And the event that is proposed, kind of a snippet that I stole from another state that they're using a similar model, is a fun, educational, interactive, hands-on opportunity for students to become familiar with a broad overview of high demand, high wage career opportunities. And we would like to possibly have the SWIB meeting bookend that week as an opportunity to capitalize on workforce development successes and opportunities. And hopefully have you all, if you're able, join part of that, what's called a WOW event. I don't know if they're gonna have a different name for that or not, but it would also encourage public involvement, SWIB involvement in other events, and a crossover and collaboration with economic development. So it could be a great week in Great Falls to showcase what the SWIB is doing and what other economic development and workforce development opportunities are happening throughout the state of Montana. So, and I would love to have any public comment on that or any comments from the board on that, but our hope is to maybe have our meeting that week of October, so October 17th. And again, kind of bookending and showcasing the economic and workforce development within the state of Montana. So with that, that's what we have for you today. We're done early, which is I'm hopefully welcomed. But any other comments from you all or public feedback?
I hopefully that works for everybody on October. I think it's a really neat opportunity to kind of expand the visibility of the SWIB as well in Great Falls. Seems like a nice opportunity. Okay. Any other questions for Wes? Public comment, as he mentioned, I'll open that up for the good of the order.
Mr. Chair, just a quick comment. This is Representative Butchery. If we're going to have these meetings in Great Falls, would it be possible to put on the agenda to invite the I can't remember his name, but the gentleman at Malmstrom that's responsible for the Skills Bridge program, and have him come sort of as a follow-up from the last meeting, discuss what they're doing from the military's point of view with regards to that program.
Yeah, if we're in Great Falls, that's a great idea, Representative Butchett.
Thank you.
And was Lafe, was he in Great Falls, or is that a different fellow with Gilbridge? I think Lafe was in Bozeman. Right?
Yeah, I think he was out of.
He's in Townsend.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a gentleman at Malmstrom who's the focal for that, and I think he'd benefit from meeting with the board.
Great. No, that's a neat program, and to give that this additional highlight, I think that's a great idea.
And I'll just look forward to Representative Buttrey, if you could send me that information of that gentleman, and I'd be happy to reach out to him when the agenda comes near.
Sure, I'll do that.
And Wes, if there's anything I can do with facilities up around Great Falls, as well as the hydro facility tours, anything like that, help facilitate anything there, please let me know.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dean. Okay, one more request for questions or comments. Okay. With that, I really appreciate everybody taking the time this morning. And as Wes said, we're ahead of schedule, so you're going to get your full lunch hour back. So it's a win across the board. So thank you again for your interest, the willingness to attend this morning. Look forward to the committee meetings and seeing you all in person in October.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Stay safe.
Bob, can you just officially adjourn the meeting?
We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.